Watch this.
Idaho's near total abortion ban is about to go into effect this month, unless a court has something to say about it. Well, Planned Parenthood is hoping Idaho's highest court has something to say, and they did, asking why the state's abortion laws are kind of confusing. This day in court was worth a 300-mile drive for one Idaho woman.
They look at the life of the fetus, but no one even thinks about the life of the mother.
Her experience having children has changed her views on abortion. Just 23 years old and competing on the world's biggest cycling stage. And he nearly won a stage. This Boise High grad is back home and telling his tale of his first Tour de France. It has been a big week for abortion rights in Idaho, at least legally. The day after the Justice Department filed a lawsuit to stop the enforcement of Idaho's near total trigger law, well, that same law and another abortion ban passed this year got their day in Idaho Supreme Court. Not to say they won't get another day in court, but that depends on what these 5 justices decide. Planned Parenthood filed 3 lawsuits against the state of Idaho for the 3 abortion laws passed over the last 3 years. Today's hearing was about them asking the high court to put a stay on Idaho's trigger law and continue the stay of Idaho's fetal heartbeat ban, the one that contains the civil enforcement component. Both are expected to go into effect within the next few weeks. That is, unless a court decides they don't, based on the legality of those laws, which is another aspect of what Planned Parenthood hoped would be part of the Supreme Court's decision. So this seems like a good time to bring in chief political reporter Joe Paris. Let's set the table here, Joe. First, the laws we're talking about today would be the trigger law from 2020, which was meant to go into effect 30 days after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which happened last month. Right. The other law we're talking about, known as Senate Bill 1309, passed this past session. It bans abortions after a heartbeat is detected, usually around 6 weeks of pregnancy. But it also carries that civil enforcement mechanism, which means family members can sue a provider, anybody who provides an abortion, for up to $20,000. So there's a chance the third law could get included in this, but that's another thing this court is supposed to decide based on what they had today. So here's what we're going to ask. Stay or no stay on these laws, or do these lawsuits get heard by a lower court? And when do we expect a decision?
Those are all great questions, and kind of if you've been following the 208 the last few weeks, there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of answers we don't have the answer to right now. But I'll tell you this, it is a good question. The answer is to when are we going to find out what the Supreme Court rules is, we don't know. The Supreme Court is on their own timeline, so they'll make their decision when they're ready. A good guess, though, is an order from the court before August 19th, and that's when one of Idaho's abortion laws are set to go into effect. So what was actually discussed in the Idaho Supreme Court today? In short, Planned Parenthood laid out a collection of constitutional and legal issues that they see with the 2 abortion laws in question. The state, represented by the Attorney General's office, along with private counsel who represented the Idaho legislature, they pushed back on those notions, saying that the laws are legal and they should not be paused. Democrat legislative leaders, Representative Alana Rubel and Senator Melissa Wintrow, they were actually sitting front row today in the Idaho Supreme Court. And I spoke with the pair this afternoon. First, Senator Wintrow described to me the emotion she felt while watching from the front row.
As I sat there, I'm thinking of women, hundreds of stories that I have, listened to, experienced, especially victims of violence and incest, and that everything is right on the stake today. My stomach was turning. I was so anxious thinking about the rights that I've had my entire lifetime. A fundamental right hangs in the balance of an argument right in front of me. And the unprecedented nature of that, of living with a right your entire life and having it ripped from you, especially thinking about having control over your own body, your own autonomy, your own choices, your own privacy, and that the hard hand of government is going to reach into my life and make a decision for me, that personal. Words can't describe, I think, the feelings that I was having inside.
A major point from the Planned Parenthood side of the courtroom revolves around the laws being vague, specifically a part of the Idaho law that deals with emergency medical exceptions in the case of saving the life of the mother. It's a major debate. Does the law give enough guidance to Idaho doctors on when they can and cannot perform an abortion? Minority Leader Rubel tells me no, she doesn't think it does. She says these laws are ridiculous.
these laws don't read like laws that were intended to actually go into effect. They are ridiculous. Having laws that have no exception for the health of the mother and that criminalize doctors in these very gray area situations, these were not designed to me with an intent that they actually take effect. These were laws to me that were designed with an intent to get the endorsement of right to life groups and to get donations in a primary, with the idea that the U.S. Supreme Court would prevent them from ever going into effect. Now they are the dog that caught the car. They were now looking at a scenario where these laws will actually go on the books, and they are outrageous. And the notion of these actually being laws that people have to follow is unimaginable.
Over on the other side of the courtroom, the Attorney General's office asked the court to abandon a position of pausing any of the abortion laws, saying that they believe they are clear and legal. Now, the state argued that on the issue of vagueness, physicians can operate under the scope of good faith medical judgment, which in their opinion sets the standard for physicians to provide abortions under Idaho law. And they say this is not vague, like Planned Parenthood is arguing. Now, Idaho's trigger law passed in 2020. House Caucus Chair Megan Blankspa sponsored the legislation on the House floor. And I spoke with her earlier today because she believes the laws are clearly written. We also talked about frustrations and confusion about the exceptions in the bill that do allow abortions.
I believe the legislation is very clear. And one of my pet peeves about what's been going on is that the left has really been using a lot of talking points that are completely inaccurate when it comes to the bill. There is an exception for the life of the mother. Now, whether they like how that's written or not, it still exists in the bill. There is an exception for rape. They might not like how it's written, but it's in the bill. There's an exception for incest. They might not like how it's written, but it's in the bill. And to promote the fact that this is some sort of blanket, doesn't have any exemptions for any one type of bill is completely and absolutely false.
And quickly, let's get back to the question of vagueness in Idaho's trigger law when it comes to the judgment of an Idaho doctor. Representative Blanksma says that she thinks the law is very clear and there's understandable decision-making room for doctors under the law.
It talks about the judgment of the doctor. Now, I think that's what we all do when we rely on medical care. And this was a big discussion that we had during COVID too, right? Is we're relying on the judgment of your medical care provider. And so it's in the legislation. And I think that oftentimes when we write legislation where we try to anticipate every single possible reaction, that's when we get into trouble. And that you need, what you're doing is trying to set a guideline when you're writing legislation and do the best job that you can as far as policy. And then there has to be some room for personal judgment, particularly when it comes to medical situations.
So we heard from both sides today. Where do we stand right now? Well, the Supreme Court of Idaho will study the issue and eventually they will put out an order ruling on the questions at hand. They can pause the pending abortion laws and continue their own legal review, or they can rule that there's no reason to prevent the laws from going into effect. There's also a third scenario where the legal question could be passed down to a district court. Brian, long story short here is we're going to be watching what the Supreme Court does. They could rule tonight, they could rule tomorrow, they could rule next week. We're going to have to watch.
And I think the vagueness pointed out by Justice Boyd during these hearings this morning, saying that the language in the trigger law doesn't say whether it supersedes the fetal heartbeat law. I mean, there's a lot of confusion still out there that may have to be decided in a court. We'll see, Joe. Thank you very much. Okay, so that was happening inside Idaho's Supreme Court. Meanwhile, outside the building, there was a small group of people waiting for the decision or possibility of a decision. At the very least, though, they wanted to let the people inside know where they stood on this subject of abortion accessibility. So if they weren't getting a decision, well, at least they wanted the people inside to know where they stood. And there weren't a lot of them, maybe 30 at most, and only a few stuck around for the duration of the hearing. But there was one woman who felt it was important enough to drive all the way from Rexburg to stick around to the very end and show, well, strength isn't always in numbers. Here's Andrew Bartline.
It took a long time for her to get here.
About 4.5 hours, almost 5.
It's just outside Idaho's Supreme Court steps, where Kiersey Ball
Outlines against or for abortion.
hangs on every word of the arguments heard inside.
I'm glad they're actually talking about it. I'm glad they're considering it.
Tucked in a pallet of protesters, Ball is unified by supporting Planned Parenthood
We had Roe versus Wade.
and their work to impose a stay on Idaho's near-total abortion ban. It's set to go into effect at the end of the month.
They're taking away our right to the choice. We don't have the choice about what we're going to do with our bodies anymore, and it really truly should be. It's not up to anybody else because they're not paying the bills. They're not taking care of the children. They're not there supporting that parent or those parents 100% of the time.
She's firm in her stance.
The statute should remain stayed.
But Kiersey hasn't always planted her feet on one side of the aisle.
I was always the person that said, I'm not going to be the woman that gets an abortion.
First question.
That was years ago.
There's a long history of criminal prohibition on abortion.
And since, Kiersey's had 2 kids.
We had a real serious conversation about having another child. And I said, I can't do it.
The financial, emotional, and physical toll. It's pushed her to her limit.
I was on bed rest. I was in the hospital multiple times throughout both my pregnancies. I was suicidal and on suicide watch with both of my pregnancies, and no one gave a damn about that. It was only about the children coming out afterwards. So no, I didn't used to think that I would be the mother that would get an abortion. I never thought that I would be the person that would get an abortion. But now, if it came down to it, I would, no question, because my kids are more important than a fetus.
As the arguments dragged on,
And you're talking about
Yeah, this is what they're doing in there.
support drained out of the crowd. Within an hour, just a few stayed in place to support the stay.
We need people to understand that this affects us and that there's a lot more of us than they think.
Kiersey understands the decision is out of her reach.
We don't know how this is going to go.
Despite the power at
Deciding
hand,
whether that's recognized
in
under
the
Idaho
palm of hers.
Constitution. That's a pure legal question. Whether it
Kiersey can
applies
only
to
wait and listen. And it
the
took her a long
state's
time
interest
to get here.
They don't want to
But
hear
the
our
text of
stories.
the
They don't want to hear what happens. They don't want to hear how it's saved us or how it's benefited us. They don't want to hear the risks of pregnancy.
Now, to be clear about her stance, she loves being a mother. Her kids are the most important part of her life, and that's a huge reason why she doesn't want another child through her first 2 pregnancies, Brian. She talked about how difficult it was, how hard it was, some physical pain, emotional pain, mental health problems as well, to where if she got pregnant again, she doesn't believe she can be fully there for her other children, and it's tough on her. It's a difficult spot to be in, and also the financial aspect too.
And there are a lot of other women out there, I'm sure, just like in that same situation, because as we know, when it comes to abortions, because of the health of the mother, it only accounts for about 3% of abortions. So there's a lot on the other side of that, as you said, the health, mental health plays a part in this as well as the health of your body, not just life or death, but just overall health and the severity of that, which is kind of what the point of the DOJ lawsuit that was filed yesterday is going to bring it apart. And as you heard, she had thoughts of, taking her own life and stuff like that. And so it's important. It's a big deal. And if you have thoughts like that, or you're in a situation like, Christy found herself, please reach out. Please find some help. You can even call as simple as 988. That's the Suicide Crisis Lifeline. So don't be afraid to use that number. All right. Thank you very much, Andrew. Well, it's been days, 10 days exactly, since the Tour de France wrapped up in Paris. Jonas Vingegaard wearing the yellow jersey for 2 stages and taking the overall title for his first Tour win. And maybe that name means something to you if you follow cycling circles. It likely does. But for the Boise bike racing aficionados, the name Mateo Jorgensen means more. Mateo has been back in Boise for about a week, having just finished his first Tour de France, where he finished a surprising 21st out of the 176 riders that started the race. He even sprinkled in a few top 5 stage finishes to get there. Well, this week, the Boise High grad has been resting, for sure, hanging with his friends and his family, but he's also been training while he's been home, getting in 20 hours on his bike because, well, there's still the rest of the professional cycling season to go. Mateo took some time from his training this week to sit down with us and reflect on his first foray into cycling's biggest race.
Hey, Mateo, what are you doing?
If training for the Tour de France was young Mateo Jorgensen's answer to his mom's question, well, it wouldn't have shocked her.
He was interested in doing anything his big brother and sister were doing, but loved the out of doors. Any athletic pursuit he was interested in, at least trying.
And ultimately succeeding, turning 3 national junior titles before he turned 19 into a professional career in Europe. Mateo took his first turn on the Tour on the day he turned 23.
But it might be Mateo Jorgensen who's played it perfectly, and here he comes just behind with Nick Schultz. Let's see if they don't work together.
Mateo made quite the impression and several mentions.
Not easy to find the breakaway. Mateo's riding great.
During the 3-week, 21-stage race across Europe.
I've been sleeping a lot this week, so I haven't had so much time to think. I've just been...
Back home in Boise, Mateo told us the pre-race nerves he thought he put behind him returned.
Yeah, I have to say, I'll admit the first week before we started the tour, when it was all kind of the lead up, and yeah, I was nervous. I mean, it was a big moment, and the Tour is the biggest bike race in the world, so yeah, definitely I was nervous.
But once he settled in, Mateo seemed to find his rhythm.
He might have just enough to win the stage, but it looks to me that Jorgensen is the strongest of these 4 riders.
But of course, the course had its share of ups and downs.
Oh, wait a moment, we've got something going on here.
Oh no, Mateo Jorgensen.
Unfortunately, quick changing tires weren't the only bumps in the road for Mateo. Okay, so I'm looking at some of your battle scars.
Yeah.
That comes with the territory.
Yeah, it's part of the sport. I mean, it's a dangerous sport. We're on super narrow tires, and crashes happen.
Was that stage 3?
I think you're right. Stage 3. It was just before we flew to France.
Just as we mentioned that, a big pileup. They were so closely tight.
And there was just a big pileup on a little cobblestone section, and I went down and fell, I think, like on my elbow like that, and had a big, deep gash.
A gash that would require stitches. That's Mateo picking himself up off the ground, and it wouldn't be his last time.
This was all from my crash, yeah, in the Tour on stage 16.
Oh, dear me.
That is Mateo Jorgensen overcooking the entrance to that corner and going down in the pursuit of the lone leader.
I was chasing a stage win, and yeah, the guy had a minute on me on a descent, and it was a downhill.
Watch this again.
I was trying to take some big risks, because to pull back a minute on a descent, you kind of have to go, yeah, you have to go a lot faster through corners, and yeah, I just pushed it too much and crashed.
That's right. At 23 years old, in his first Tour de France, Mateo actually had a stage win in his sights.
Yeah, you just spend so much time preparing and sacrificing all the rest of your life that when you do get there and you have, you feel like you have the ability to win, it's like you want to do it, and it's super motivating. So it wasn't as unfortunate because I hit the ground. It was more just like, okay, well, it's done now. I lost, and when you have that much adrenaline and you're trying to win a stage of the Tour de France, I didn't even feel the crash at all until after the stage and when I was getting cleaned up by the doctor.
Even with that crash, Mateo finished 4th for the second time.
Yeah.
That close.
It just, yeah, 4th is like the worst place in cycling. I mean, it just doesn't, it's not good for anything, It's like not a podium, you're up there, but you didn't really do anything. So yeah, it was pretty disappointing. All I can take from it is that, I showed myself well.
Okay, so yeah, overall then, your first time out and you do as well as you did, that's got to feel pretty good and feel like there are better chances for you.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's super motivating. I mean, I actually feel super motivated to go back out on my bike and work hard and try to have a good second half of the year and try to win a race.
Okay, so what does that do for like the team mentality? They look at you and say, we got somebody here who's not just going to be a support rider. He's going to contend.
For sure. Yeah, it's huge. yeah, as a young rider, you kind of have to prove yourself in these big teams because you're riding with guys, like some of my teammates have been professional for 20 years. So they've been professional as long as I've been alive. So despite being disappointed in the moment to not win a stage, I'm looking back now and it's like, wow, you know, I'm young and it was my first tour and I think I performed well and showed that, you know, I have the potential to do it in the future. So there's not much more you can ask for and pretty lucky.
Okay, so we all know fourth place in a stage in the Tour de France is not like nothing, but Mateo joined Team Movistar 3 years ago, which is a team based in Spain, so he had to pick up Spanish pretty quickly. When I asked him if he has to explain to people how someone from Idaho is racing in Europe on a regular basis or even just where Idaho is, he said, actually, there are quite a few riders and directors on his team that are Basque, so yeah, they've heard of Boise, Idaho. Mateo will only be home for a few more days, returning to his home away from home, that's in Nice, France, on August 14th because there's a race in Hamburg coming up. But get this, Mateo was hoping to go from the Tour de France to riding in the Bogus Basin Hill Climb on August 13th, but alas, today his team said, no, you can't do that. Well, the 208 is a hotbed of cycling news on this Wednesday because Mateo isn't the only Idahoan making a splash across the pond. On Sunday, not to be outdone by Mateo, we had a woman finish in the top 10 in France. Veronica Ewers, the Moscow-born Moscow High class of 2012, former college soccer player who only turned pro less than a year ago, well, she finished 9th in the Tour de France Femme, the top American rider, by the way. And to get there, she had to turn in 7th place in a final stage finish. She even had a top 5 finish in stage 4. Well, last week, as we were keeping tabs on Veronica, Michelle hit us up with this question about the Tour de France Femme. Why is this the first women's Tour de France in 30 years? More than 30 years, actually. The last one being held in 1989, which was a big year for Taylor Swift and rock ballads, Batman and New Kids on the Block, but the last year for the Tour de France Femme. You could have been born and have your own kids in elementary school at this time in that amount of time. In fact, most of this year's riders are under the age of 35. So why was 1989 the last year it was held? Well, to be honest, it was a lack of money and limited media coverage, which has kind of plagued women's cycling for, well, ever. For comparison, the men's race, the riders there competing for €2.3 million purse, with the winner taking home €500,000 for the Tour de France. This year's women's race, the winner got €50,000. The total prize money, only $250,000. All right, before we get to your comments, I want to remind you the 208 is going to be off tomorrow. NFL is taking over this time slot with the preseason kicking off right here on NBC, but we will be back on Friday. All right, let's get to your comments. Most of them coming in about the abortion hearings at Idaho Supreme Court today. Do women in Idaho use abortion as a birth control method? If I knew a pregnancy could kill me, I would take permanent measures to prevent the pregnancy and not depend on abortion. What about something that develops, I don't know, during pregnancy that might endanger your life or your health? In my day, the doctor had the last word on medical care. When did some congressmen have the final word? Asked Dan and Emmett. Seems to be the case a lot lately. But this one from Steve, Kansas, a red state with twice as many registered Republicans as registered Democrats, gave every state a plan to settle the abortion rights question. Let the voters, not politicians or religious beliefs, decide the issue. Again, it takes a lot of signatures to get it on the ballot. We'll see you tomorrow.